All right, hello and welcome to the Jank Tank. My name is Plum, and today I am doing my first ever set review. Now this is gonna be a little different. I am not a limited player or a spike of any sort. If you catch my stream on Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday on Twitch, we like to brew outside the box and explore interesting ideas. If you follow me on mtgazone.com, you know I write their fun and janked articles. So instead of sort of talking limited, where I might go over best card choices and viable archetypes, or sort of coming at this from a competitive mindset, which I do want my decks to be viable, we're going to do something a little different. And I instead am just going to take you through cards I think are interesting and I'm excited to sort of brew with and mess around with when the set drops on Arena. So I thought we'd just get right into it. We're just gonna go card by card in somewhat of an order, color order. And I'm just gonna talk about my thoughts behind the card, what it made me think of, and what sort of ideas in terms of decks and shells that it can be slotted into. So let's just get right into it. Let's start with card number 1. Basil Cabaretti Loudmouth is a 2-mana 2/2. It's 1 and a white, flash, legendary human citizen. When it enters, you get to choose one or both tap target creature or untap target creature. So, this guy, when I saw him, immediately made me think of the Jolly Balloon Man, which we built a shell for on stream that featured an infinite combo with Combat Celebrants, some way to produce treasures, and either Reflection of Kiki-Jiki or the Balloon Man in a sense, because this is sorcery speed. But allowed you to take infinite combat steps, because when you exert Combat Celebrant, it untaps all your creatures, which means you can copy Celebrant, give it haste, exert that copy, untap all your creatures, copy it, and so on and so forth. Now the problem with Basil is he's legendary. So Reflection of Kiki-Jiki doesn't copy legendaries. However, you can get around that with dedicated Doll Maker to make it into a copy that's not legendary and also an artifact. So that sense, you could copy it with Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. When it enters, tap something your opponent controls, untap Reflection of Kiki, pay a mana, copy it, untap Kiki, copy it, untap Kiki over and over, equal to the amount of mana you have. However, if you have something like Jolly Balloon Man, yes, they're only 1/1s, but if you're playing the mirror box, then suddenly the legend rule doesn't apply. These are now 2/2s, even though they enter as 1/1s because of the mirror box. And then same thing, you can make a bunch of flying, hasty 2/2s that tap down creatures when they enter, equal to the amount of mana you have with the Jolly Balloon Man. So it's a little more convoluted than the other original combo we played. This is straightforward, right? You get a way to make mana, you get a Combat Celebrant on the field, and you copy it a bunch of times. So this adds another color, even though we're already splashing for Jolly Balloon Man. But I feel like it's worth exploring because this is pretty cheap, and the fact that it has flash lets you play it at your opponent's end step and then try and go off in a later turn, especially if you know you're gonna flip a Kiki-Jiki beforehand or something like that. I think there's some merit to sort of exploring this guy in that shell because he has utility outside the combo. Moving on, Confessor's Bindings. Red-White Convoke, especially like the Gleeful Demolition version, has been around quite a bit in the past. And Confessor's Bindings is a 1-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may tap 2 untapped creatures and or treasures you control. If you do, draw a card. Otherwise, you sack this enchantment. So a super cheap card advantage engine that already slots into an existing archetype where you're trying to play a bunch of creatures out fast and then use them as tap fodder. So I think this is pretty good if you go, turn 1 planes, turn with double Ornithopter, play your Binding, and then suddenly you draw an additional card. You have an engine set, and you're just cranking out new cards every turn. But I think that an unexplored card that I've been impressed with, we played in a lot of sort of blue steel style shells, is Throne of the God Pharaoh, which is a 2-mana artifact. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So pair these together, if we're not using treasures and just creatures, suddenly every time you tap something, you're draining for 2 every single turn. Then, you know, if you're spamming things, maybe you fired off a Gleeful Demolition, you use 2 of them to draw a card, and earlier in the turn, you tap some Ornithopters and a Loxodon to play a Loxodon. Suddenly, you have a board of like 4 or 5 tap creatures, and you're draining for 4 or 5 in addition to whatever you attacked with. So, we played a shell like this called Loxobots not too long ago on the stream, but I'd like to revisit maybe just a mono white version with bindings as a way to continually get gas throughout the game, because a 1 mana way to draw an extra card every single turn is pretty good, even though you have a little bit of additional cost with the tapping creatures. But if you're playing something cheap, Draven Inspector, Ornithopter, I feel like it's not that hard of a requirement to fulfill. So excited to see if this slots into anything. I know Aspiring Spike was trying to play it in like a Collector's Cage deck. I haven't played that personally, but I could see that doing some work in Historic as well. Next up, I'm not gonna go over all of these, and I know these should be swapped because these are the cards from the set, but I want to talk Moon Mist. I played a Moon Mist deck when we got Final Fantasy because of Sephiroth and Cecil, right? Both are humans that can transform off of Moon Mist. And in the future, we're also getting transformable things in Avatar: The Last Airbender set. But with the Spider-Man set through the Omenpaths, we're getting these 5 creatures, white, blue, black, red, green. All of them 3 mana or less, that can now be transformed because of the modal double-face card ruling change. So if you didn't hear about that, modal double-face cards where you can either cast the front or the back, one or the other, can now be transformed from front to back. Doesn't matter if they have a transform ability or not. So these ones you see on the screen, let's look at Vigo here. He's a 3 mana 3/3. When it enters, you return target creature card with mana value 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then built into it, you can transform it, activate it as sorcery. But on the backside, you can also just cast it for 6 mana as a 5/5, menace, trample, haste, and so on. Usually it's one or the other, but the front side just happens to have the transformation built in. Now, doesn't matter what it is. It could be one of the modal double-faced lands, or the front side's a creature, the back side's a land. You can transform them with Moon Mist if you meet the requirement. So this, I feel like, is a card to definitely keep an eye on. Out of all of these, Vigo's very strong, right? If we're already playing something like Cecil from Final Fantasy, he eats removal. Turn 3, we drop a Vigo, return Cecil to the field, and then turn 4, we Moon Mist. Suddenly, we have a 5/5 and a 4/4 with lifelink, and we're swinging. Seems pretty solid. Nia Style Storyteller is also pretty good. Transforms into a Flying Vigilance Haste 4/4. Whenever you play land or cast a spell from exile, you get a counter on it, and then you can remove 2 counters to exile and get an impulse draw. That's, you know, a card advantage engine, albeit in colors that are not green. But kind of card advantage all by itself, plus its front side is card advantage because you get the impulse draw there too. And then Kren, Undercity Dreamer, when it enters, you put a counter on top of each of 2 target creatures, transforms into a 4/3, again with haste. Put a counter on it, he gains hexproof and becomes colorless until end of turn for 2 mana of any color. Whenever you attack, you can double the number of each kind of counter on each spider and legendary creature control. So this guy has built-in protection and gets bigger when you attack if you put counters on it. So he's already in green, which means you can, you know, turn 2 Kren, turn 3 Moonbeast, swing, and have built-in protection if you played a Mana Dork, which seems pretty good to me. But I'm excited to see if we can get something coherent where the main problem with Moon Mist that I found when I was brewing in Historic was, okay, yes, you can transform some creatures into some sweet things, but what happens when you don't transform them? You just kind of have some generic, non-synergistic creatures that can't really form a cohesive plan on their own. But these guys have some decent front sides. This one even makes a 2/1 spider, so you get 2 bodies. This one puts counter on things. where you might be able to have a chance of the deck working without Moon Mist at all, and then this is just sort of a gotcha kind of button. Lastly, I put Asika on here because although it's not a human, so it doesn't get transformed, there are cards like Leyline of Transformation and things like that that can give creatures a different typing, so we could make this a human, meaning we could have a Leyline, play Asika, Moon Mist, and suddenly we have a Prismatic Bridge without having to pay 5 mana of different colors, and you can start just sort of ripping into creatures and planeswalkers there. So, pretty excited. You know I want to play some Fleam, even though that's probably like the worst one out of these. But I think, especially as we get more and more double phase cards, I think that's inevitable. Obviously, we know they're coming in Avatar. Moon Mist is definitely something to keep an eye on for the future. Next up is Verilax the Haven Skin, 5 mana, 5/5. It's 5 white mana. Legendary creature. When it enters, if it was cast, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and if damage would be dealt to Verilax, prevent that damage and put many counters on him. Similar to Stormwild Caprador in terms of ability, this is a 3 mana 1/3 with flying. It says if a non-combat damage would be dealt to it, prevent that damage, put a counter on it for each damage. Prevent it this way. So if you remember in old Historic, there was a deck where you played Caprador and then you played like Deafening Clarion, deal 3 to all creatures. You wipe your opponent's board, but your Caprador doesn't die. It gets 3 counters on it, and suddenly you have a 4/6 swinging in the air, and your opponent has nothing. Also gains like lifelink and stuff like that. So this has that sort of similar feel, so you could probably slot it into like a bigger version of that deck. But then I was sort of looking, excuse me, at like, we also have Sun Titan, right? And this is 5 white pips, so we can play it in Nykthos Shell. So you could, curve a Verilax into a Sun Titan. You return something, and then you start returning something with 3 or less every single turn, whether it be like a White Orchid Phantom, Charming Prince, just some generic sort of white blink Value Town deck. Cool thing is, if your Sun Titan dies, you can play another Verilax and just reanimate it and get double the value. But the most interesting thing I find here is Pariah. We do have Pariah on Historic, in the Historic format in Arena, and this says all damage that will be dealt to you is dealt to enchanted creatures instead, and Verilax prevents all damage and gets bigger when damage is dealt. So if you enchant it, suddenly you can't die to burn or combat damage, because it all gets dealt to Verilax instead. And it's a little fragile, but very similar to Solemnity Lock, albeit a bit harder to protect, but nothing to laugh at either, right? It's not crazy to think that you can make it to turn 5 and 6. You could probably play green-white and ramp into it a little bit more. And then against creature decks, which you don't see as much anymore, but like elves or goblins or whatever, you kind of have like a I can't lose button stapled in. So pretty cool. There's also cards like Gideon's Sacrifice that redirect damage and stuff, which I think could be pretty sweet. And then suddenly you just have like, opponent swings you for 20, you redirect it, and suddenly you have like 25 that you swing back at them with. Also reminds me of, I don't know what the 4 mana Obliterator, the white Obliterator, that has a very similar ability. I should have put that on here, but some good redundancy. But I think it'd be sweet in some sort of value-based white Devotion shell. Next one, you're an Oski, Weaver and Guide. Legendary 3/3 for 3, has Enweb. If you don't remember what Enweb was, you can cast this spell for its web cost if you also return a tapped creature you control to his owner's hand. And then when it enters, you get to look at opponent's hand, choose a type other than creature. Spells of the chosen type cost 1 more to cast. I think this card's pretty sweet. It's a legendary, so it plays well with Mox Amber, but your web allows you to just bounce things back to your hand. So let's say you White Orchid Phantom on turn 2, turn 3, play a land, swing with the Orchid, deal 2, cast and web. You get a 3/3, you tax their cards when it enters, and then you return your Orchid back to your hand, and then you can play Orchid again because this only costs 1 mana. So suddenly you get to blow up a second land, and now all their spells of the chosen type are cast. Pair with that, you know, we have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, we have Thorn of Amethyst, we have Lodestone Golem, a lot of taxing effects, we have Vern Widmere. I think there could be some cool Death and Taxes style shell. We have Lightstall Inquisitor, which has Vigilance, so it's a little harder to trigger in web. But being able to, you know, tap this to some other ability, maybe crew a Smuggler's Copter, I don't know. And then web that, and then bounce the Inquisitor back to your hand, play it again, tax something. I think that could add up pretty fast and slow the opponent down quite a bit. Also, it's a human, so it gets buffed by Thalia's Lieutenant and Adeline and things like that too. So, I'm interested in exploring like a mono white taxes build, human based, but we'll see where that goes. I think this is a fun card, and the fact that it's a 1-mana 3/3, 1-mana 3/3 in a lot of ways, is pretty cool. Next up, Bellion the Parch, 2-mana 2/2 legendary creature, elemental, which is relevant. Whenever you cast a blue spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn if it's a creature, and then beginning of your end step, untap it until your next turn it becomes a land and gains add blue. Don't have a ton to say about this one besides it's interesting. In some ways, it reminds me of like a Myth Realized. It dodges sorcery speed removal, right? Because only a creature on your turn, and it grows the more spells you cast, albeit it's temporary, right? It gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But the cool part is it kind of ramps you in like a blue shell, right? It becomes a land on your opponent's turn, and it untaps itself, which is relevant because Consign to Memory, Spell Pierce, Spell Snare are all relevant cards in this format against Boros, Eldrazi, things like that. Combo decks. So I think it'd be sweet in some sort of tempo build, but the problem is it's also legendary, so it's a little awkward in multiples. That being said, I'm sorry, gosh, it is an elemental, so that means it has 2 pips for Master of Waves, and it gets buffed by Master of Waves on your turn. So it could easily slot into a Devotion style shell, and the buff is from any blue spell. It doesn't have to be an instant sorcery, whatever. It can just be anything you play. So if you're, you know, devotioning, adding 5 mana off of Nykthos, and you're playing 3 spells and then swinging, suddenly you got a 5/5, and then you get extra mana to hold up a counterspell on their turn. It seems like a sweet deal to me. So interested in exploring what this guy does. Probably not as a 4 of in that style build, but I think I could make something work. Next up, we have Murata Neuron Hacker, a 1-mana 0/2, which is basically a reverse Aether Vial. So you put counters on it every time you draw your first or second card each turn, and then you can cast without paying its mana cost an artifact equal to or less than the number of counters on it. So a couple things there. Number 1, faster in getting counters, right? If you're drawing 2 cards a turn, it's getting 2 counters a turn. But 2, it is a cast ability. You don't just put it onto the battlefield. You are casting that so whatever artifact you play can still get countered. Very similar to Joyra, Ageless Innovator, which we played also on stream. Puts 2 counters on itself, and then you can put an artifact card from mana value X or less on the battlefield. We've played that with something like Lodestone Golem or God Pharaoh's Statue. Murata's kind of worked at the same speed, but for 1 mana less. And in shells where we already have a lot of blue artifact-based creatures, right? Where you're playing Tamiyo, where you're playing Emry. We have Seat of the Synod. We have Thought Cast and things like that. Thought Monitor, drawing us constant cards to power up the counters on Murata. I could see this putting in some work. You could even do some sort of mini combos, like if this is at 2, you play Corridor Monitor, untap Murata when it enters, tap it again, put another 2-drop on the field, and sort of spam the board. I don't think that's as good because you're not gaining counters as you do so. But blue also just has access to such easy draw, Hymn to the Ages. You can go blue-red and have redundancy with Joyra, Ribald Shanty, and just be able to power this up and quickly just dump artifacts on the board. So I could see it in another maybe like with Emry and Tamiyo, like a blue steel style deck where you're trying to like land an early Lodestone Golem, Statue, Wormcoil Engine, that sort of thing. but we'll have to wait and see because it's also just a 0-2, right? It's kind of fragile. Does play well with Mox Amber, though. So I'm sort of back and forth on this one. I think it would be cool, but if Joyra really hasn't done that much, I'm not sure this one will do that much either, but we'll see. Next up, Spectral Restitching. 1 and an X. It's a blue and an X. Instant. Exile X artifacts or creatures. Return the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner control at the beginning of the next end step. Super cool. It's a mass blink spell that gets to bounce everything it hits for the turn. With Containment Priest, that suddenly becomes exile all of your opponent's stuff, right? They leave, and then you have Priest out, so they can't re-enter the battlefield. However, that does not work with artifacts. Containment Priest is only with creatures. But that's pretty cool in blue-white. And if you're in blue-white, I would also assume you're already playing some sort of like Ephemerate Soul Hoarder kind of shell if you're going to do something like this. So then you can get extra value off your creatures, Aether Channeler, White Orchid Phantom, that sort of stuff. Get additional ETB effects. It's good backup to Ephemerate, but also it just kind of acts as like removal, right? You can just blink your opponent's stuff for a turn to clean the board up and get some damage in, and then just delay them from using stuff for that turn. Same idea. Let's say you're playing against Affinity, their upkeep, you exile their Vault of Whispers and Seat of the Synod for 3 mana, and suddenly they have no lands for the turn in the early game. It's definitely powerful for just a single blue X, and its instant speed. There's got to be something you can do with it, so we'll probably try this in a bunch of shells. We even just recently played Containment Priest with Eldrazi Displacer and Trackhand Trainer, both of which could kind of get their things reset with restitching, but having a backup way to exile things with Priest besides Displacer seems pretty cool. So definitely take a look at this one too. I don't have too much to say about The House Grows Hungry, besides that it's just good value. I know some people are jamming like Jund Midrange and Green Black Rock, and I don't think this would be like a 4 of, but reminds me a lot of Elspeth's Nightmare, that this is basically just a murder with extra value stapled onto it with a relevant card type for like Nethergoyf, right, to turn on Delirium. So 3 mana, Saga, Chapter 1, destroy a creature. Chapter 2, each player may discard. If they don't, they lose 3, and then just exiles any number of target players' graveyards. So kind of cool. Like I said, similar to Elspeth's Nightmare, kind of similar to the Eldest Reborn. I don't know why I would play like a mono black Sagas deck, but this is the Jank Tank, so we might. And being able to curve this and like discard a big baddie and then reanimate it later with Eldest Reborn seems pretty cool. But we also are getting to like a critical mass of sagas where I finally want to build like a Satsuki the Living Lore deck, which is a 2 mana 1/3, put a lore counter on each saga you control, and then when it dies you get to return a saga enchantment creature to its owner's hand, or you get one back from your graveyard. So Abzan or 4-color with like Fable of the Mirror Breaker and other relevant sagas seems pretty cool. Like a saga mid-range value something. Not sure how I would build it. I'll probably have to really sit down and look what else is in the format to mess with. But I've been looking for a home for Satsuki for quite a while, and I think we could probably get something going. Abzan probably seems the best with some of the recent Alchemy sagas, mice, and things like that too. But this probably isn't top priority, but thought-provoking when it comes to just sort of the value that you can get out of it. Next up, kind of another one that I just think is cool. Lewis Pompous Pillager, 2/1 lifelink, enters with X counters on him, and when he enters, he deals X damage to target opponent. He's a vampire, which is kind of relevant. He has lifelink, so the damage he deals also makes you gain life. And I don't know, he just seems like a fun threat if you're playing Mono Black Devotion. We have Nykthos, obviously, but we also have Cabal Stronghold as a way to ramp a bunch of mana. We have Urborg in the format. However, Cabal Stronghold counts basic swamps, so it won't count like your Nykthos and Stronghold itself. But then you could at least tap your other stuff to pay for this. Cast Lewis for, 5 to 8 mana and just dome people, and then cast a Gray Merchant afterwards. But I like that it's also just, early on, turn 3, it can be, a 3-2 lifelinker, or turn 2, a 2-1 lifelinker. You could play Meat Hook Massacre. And just kind of have that sub theme of just like stockpiling devotion on these cheap things, Gifted Aetherborn, that kind of stuff. Even what's the 2 mana card? Deals X, you gain X, where X is number of swamps you control. You could definitely build some sort of not just mono black devotion, but like swamp based mono black devotion with Cabal Stronghold as redundancy. So I just think he's neat. Let's move on. Terminus of Return. This one is weird because it's obviously strong. It's a 2 mana legendary artifact, indestructible, taps for a black, 7 mana, and exile creature control. You get to harness it, and then that means you get, at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. I mean, a mono black mana rock is interesting by itself, but the fact that it has extra text is kind of just gravy. But at the same time, I'm not sure there's anything that really wants this right now besides like EDH and Brawl. It reminds me a lot of like Whip of Erebos, but kind of easier in a sense to get going. But at the same time, we had something called Journey to Eternity way back in Ixalan, which I messed around with a lot, and it never did anything. And this had like a 5 mana cost to just reanimate things, and this is free. So a lot of similarities here, but I don't know where you put this, to be honest. Like, you can cheapen the cost if you played like an Omenhawker shell and tried to like ramp into the Harness Infinity thing. You could use it as just like an extra piece of something in like an Emperor of Bones Reanimator build, but if you're playing Emperor of Bones, I feel like you're just trying to do that as quick as possible, and getting the 7 mana is not really your game plan. So I think it's unique. I think it's cool, but I don't know if it goes anywhere right now. So again, just a card to keep an eye on for the future. I mean, 2 mana rocks with upside are always good, but it's just kind of figuring out where they're good. Next up, kind of a duo here. We have Cam and Ferric Havoc duo, literally. Flying Haste. Whenever you discard a card, gets +2/+0 until out of turn. So kind of similar to Slitshot Show Off, except triggers off discards. And then Knife Trick, which isn't anything crazy. It's just a common, but it's interesting that we have a mono red way to deal with creatures that also discards. Or it acts as a discard outlet. So I think the obvious place for this is a Hollow One build with Hollow One, Looting, Detective's Phoenix, Insolent Neonate, Marauding Mako, Flameblade Adept. This is just like another evasive creature like Adept that gets big real fast. We played some like Boros cycling shells on stream too with like Zenith Flare and things like that. So this also triggers off cycling. And I think it could do well there. You're cycling, 3 or 4 cards in a turn, along with some of the other smaller guys that like ping whenever you cycle. I feel like you can put a pretty fast clock on the opponent. But I think the hard part is like Slitshot Show Off has plot, right? So the turn you play it, you can immediately like pump it, 5 or 6 power and swing. Whereas this one, you have to have mana up so you can cycle things the turn you play it, or else you're just smacking for 1, which isn't the worst, but I feel like you want to try and get the most out of it when you play it, so you might have to hold off a turn or 2. But either way, I think it's a solid threat in those sort of shells. I'm excited to test out something like this, even with like Seasoned Pyromancer, right? You're drawing and discarding, and then you give this +4/+0 and get to swing for 5 after the turn after you play it and refill your hand. Seems pretty sweet. And then, like I said, Knife Trick, just cool. Usually when you play something, a burn-based spell in this, it has Madness and you have to discard it first, but this acting as your discard outlet seems pretty cool, where you can, remove a blocker, discard a Detective's Phoenix, your Mako and your Adept both get pumped, and then you can, replay Phoenix after by exiling it. I don't know. I think it's a nice little piece of glue or addition to those sort of archetypes that might have some use in the future. Infernus. Again, nothing crazy. 3 mana, 0/0. When it enters, you get to search for a basic mountain and put it on the battlefield. Taps. Gets +1/+1 for each mountain you control. When it leaves, sack a land. I think this is interesting because it's a 0/0 and an elemental, which means it gets reanimated by Thunderkin Awakener. We do have we have Ball Lightning on the we have Ball Lightning in the format. We also have that new 3 mana equipment that conjures Ball Lightnings. And in a sense, it's not as good, but this is kind of like a Ball Lightning, right? It doesn't have haste, but with Thunderkin or even Vesperlark can reanimate it. You get to ramp in mono red, which is cool. And then with Thunderkin Awakener, it's kind of a nombo because you get a land and then you have to sack that land because when it leaves, you sacrifice. And Thunderkin Awakener will send it back to your graveyard. But that land doesn't really do anything. You're sort of your net loss of 0. So it grows as the game goes on. It's another thing you can reanimate off Awakener. I also played some sort of Scredless Red with Caughfire Resistance recently, which is like a mountain-based mid-range deck, which I think this could be a fun little threat in there too. And does really well on curve, right? You can play this on turn 3, and then you have the mana from the search ability for Koth on 4. And then this goes find you another one, so you can just keep growing it as the game goes on. But at the same time, it's just a 3 mana, no haste, no ETB besides the mountain searching, and it doesn't have trample or anything. So it might be too cute for the format, but still something I'd like to try out. I really like Thunderkin Awakener, and I'm waiting for something to break it. And this is just another sort of piece of that puzzle, I think. Next up is Kraza the Swarmist 1. Riot on a 2 mana 2/1. Other spiders you control have Riot, which isn't really relevant. And then spells and abilities can't be countered. Damage can't be prevented. I think that's pretty sweet. In the back of my brain, I've had a thought or a dream of some sort of mono red Hate Bears list with the cards you see on screen. Harsh Mentor for activate abilities, Needlehead for draw, Eidolon for cheap spells, Ash Zealot for combo. And I think this might be, kind of like I said, another piece of the puzzle. Gives all your creatures either +1/+1 or haste. Or, I'm sorry, it has +1/+1 or haste. So it's either a 2/1 that gets in right away, or a 3/2 for 2, which isn't the worst. But it gets around the 1 range, it gets around 9 lives. It's good against counter spells. Damage can't be prevented. So I feel like you'd be able to get something there, if not just as like a sideboard card for like I said, some sort of mono red Hate Bears or like Punisher kind of deck, attrition based, where you're just constantly pinging and dealing damage for every sort of game action they take, whether it be casting spells, doing stuff in the graveyard, drawing cards, or abilities. Again, not crazy, but just a cool card to have in that sort of tool belt for this kind of show. Guys, I want to play Labyrinth Raptor. I didn't know how to tell you. I've been looking on how to do it. I know you're probably saying, Plum, are you crazy? The answer is yes. This card's bad, but I'm going to try and play it. And we're going to play Laszlo. Enthusiastic Accuser, 3 mana 2/2, Human Citizen. When it enters, you suspect a creature. Whenever a creature you control with Menace attached, create a treasure. So, we're just going to play Menace Tribal, right? Labyrinth Raptor, 2 mana 2/2 with Menace. Whenever a creature with Menace becomes blocked, defending player sacks a creature blocking it, and then it gives all creatures you control +1/+0 for a black and a red if they have Menace. Pretty sweet. Hard to block. We have some other cheap creatures. Stalactite Stalker has Menace, gets bigger as you sacrifice things, act as removal. Notably, Stalker will get bigger off of the treasures you sacrifice that you generate off of Laszlo. And then we also have stuff like Stormfist Crusader, again with Menace, on color, as a card event engine that keeps you drawing cards. And the cool part is this is not a one or more. So whenever a creature, right? If I attack with all 3 of these, I get 3 treasures. And I get to just continue sort of barfing my hand onto the board. I'll have to sit down. I think I've only looked at it once or twice, to be honest. But there's got to be some other irrelevant creatures with Menace, I hope. But this guy seems pretty cool as a way to sort of keep the creatures, like keep things going. And when we already have built-in card advantage like Stormfist Crusader that also trigger it, I feel like you have quite a good engine to just keep the gas going, especially for an aggro deck like this. So I think this is Jonah Jameson, right? Get me more pictures of Spider-Man. But in this case, we want more pictures of Nightmare Dinosaurs. So pretty sweet. Guys, real talk. We gotta talk about this one. Terran Tusk, the Unwisely Awoken, is a 2-mana 2/2 Spider Boar hero, legendary creature. You get a food token. Other spiders, boars, bats, bears, birds, cats, dogs, frogs, jackals, lizards, mice, otters, rabbits, raccoons, rats, squirrels, turtles, and wolves get +1/+1. Boys, this is what will make Three Little Pigs good. This will do it. I think this is what's going to happen. We tried Three Little Pigs deck not too long ago on stream because I wanted to make it work, and it actually did kind of okay, but also not. It was bad. But Porcine Portent is sweet. The Three Little Pigs have actually some rather relative abilities, and now suddenly we have another 2-mana card that buffs all our pigs, is a boar itself, so it triggers things like Porcine Portent, or what's the other? There's another one that conjures stuff from the Three Little Pigs, like the Swine Driver or something like that. This might be it, boys. We might be able to finally break onto the ladder with Three Little Pigs. Not really, but I have a dream. But I'm excited to revisit this with this card. Super cool. And then there's also just some like other cute little interactions, like it buffs like a lot of the Bloomburrow stuff. So we've tried like a frog tribal deck, and this just so happens to buff frogs, even though it's not a frog itself. But it has rabbit, raccoon, squirrel, and other sort of relevant types. So it might be something there. I'll have to take a look. We also have Swarmyard on Arena, which regenerates insects, rats, spiders, or squirrels. Squirrel tribal when. And we also have Blex, which is a pest. I don't think this... Unfortunately, it doesn't do pests, which is sad. But that gives bats, insects, snakes, and spiders, which he's a spider, chat. +1/+1, and when it dies, you gain 4 life. So you have like these weird lord effects that all sort of don't synergize with each other, but also do. Like, none of them buff each other, but they buff the other creature types, and yet none of the creature types they buff care about the card type that the lord is buff. It's just weird. But yeah, Three Little Pigs, tier 1. You heard it here first. I'm gonna break the format. That's all I'm gonna say. Boris the Spider Rider, legendary creature. It's 3 mana for a 4/3. Has trample and web. Again, that's return a tap creature to your hand. You pay the web cost. If it was cast using a web, he enters with X counters on him, where X is the mana value of the return creature. The obvious one is you play Ignoble Hierarch, you play Llanowar Elves, you play Bird of whatever it might be, or you even just play, I don't know, Fervent Champion. You're just playing something generic in terms of Gruul aggro, and then you either tap it, float a mana, cast it for an web's cost, so you return Ignoble Hierarch, and then suddenly you have a 5/4 for 2 mana on turn 2, and you get to replay the Ignoble Hierarch if you hit your land drops. Or what I find interesting, again, I'd have to look at it, but things like Mind Security that conjure like a Flame Tongue Kavu. Now, this isn't necessarily into like the aggro side of things, but there may possibly be some sort of like Gruul ETB bounce deck, right? Because you could like play a Flame Tongue Kavu, kill something, Next turn, swing with Kavu. Kavu's what, 4 mana? And then Boris, bounce the Kavu back to your hand, but it perpetually has cast it for 0. So now suddenly you have an 8/7 Boris and a free Flametongue Kavu to deal 4 to something. I think that's super sweet. That's more of like a mid-rangey style build, right? Obviously you have to draw the Kavu and stuff. But Mind Security is a 3/1 for 2 with Trample, which is kind of hot. So I think there's like a couple different routes you could go with this one, but interesting for sure, especially that it's so cheap and it lets you reuse ETBs in the mid to late game. So I'm excited for this one a lot. Legendary creature, there's also the whole Bard class shell. Red, green, cheaper to cast. That's interesting too. This one, again, just a common, but just an interesting and good addition to have to the format is Gallant Citizens. Just a 1/1 that draws a card, like Elvish Visionary, or it's also basically just a color shifted Pawn Prophet. But like I said with some of the other cards, it kind of just helps us hit critical mass if for some reason we need a critical mass. A while ago I played this list here, which is like old school mono green devotion, where like I'm playing Burning Tree Emissary, Courser of Kruphix, Pawn Prophet, Primetime, Voyaging Satyr to untap Nykthos, Utopia Sprawl, Oath of Nissa, and then we're just casting Genesis Wave and trying to dump things onto the field. Between Pawn Prophet, Citizen, now we have 8 cards that can draw us and add 2 devotion to green each. Plus we have Burning Tree Emissary and Nykthos. I don't know if that is ever going to be better than the current mono green devotion builds with like Cavalier and Storm the Festival, but it's just nice to have like easy ways to power up that devotion. And in mono white, we already have the Spirited Companion as a card draw, but double white Pip is also kind of cool, even though mono white devotion doesn't really have a whole lot of payoffs unless we play that card we mentioned earlier that reanimates something, and we could play this in a Sun Titan build. But interesting, kind of sweet. Don't think we need that much redundancy, but it's there if I ever brew something that wants it. MacD and Itla Skysnarers. Spider Human Hero, flying, artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter tapped. 1, this is just a good hate bear. It's a legendary 2/2 with flying, it's evasion, and sort of keeps everything your opponent has under control. But I've also sort of been looking at a lot of shells featuring Judge's Familiar and Mausoleum Wanderer. We also just got Clarion Conqueror not too long ago, and I think we're starting to hit a point where we could build some sort of flying hate bears deck. We have Hushbringer, which turns off a lot of things, stops Boros from transforming to Johnny. Don't talk to me about Flage. And a lot of other ETB effects. We have 8 1-drops that can counter spells for cheap. We have Skycat Sovereign, which is a beautiful beater that can add to your board presence and just keeps growing throughout the game. We have Clarion Conqueror, again, sort of shutting down your opponent. I'm sure there's some Vern Wingmare, which taxes things like Dahlia. And then these cards also have a lot of decent utility in terms of spells, right? There's the counter spell that counters for unless they pay 4 if you have a flying creature. There's Winged Words, there's Favorable Winds as a Lord effect, there's Empyrean Eagle, gives all your creatures flying a buff. So I think this deck's rather straightforward. You're just blue-white flyers, but the fact that your flyers also have all this extra sort of taxing and attrition-based abilities might mean that a deck like this could pop up and actually like steal some games and do pretty well. And your sideboard options are awesome because you're in blue-white, so you still get access to Consign to Memory, you get Fragment Reality and Rest in Peace and all that sort of stuff too. So this is probably one of the builds I'm excited to try out the most, just because it feels like we have access to so much, and you can build it a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's just like straightforward. Just play your creatures, swing in the air, and all of them slow the opponent down. So pretty sweet. Scions of the Earth Spider. 5 mana, 5/5. Spider human hero. Flying, first strike, trample, lifelink. Via your combat, other spiders gain all of that. I don't want to play this with spiders. Chat, it's Chromaticor. It's another Chromaticor, right? So now we have 8 Chromaticors for Priest of Possibility and Soul Flayer. I don't think I have to say that much more. Again, super straightforward, but, you know, hitting a Priest on turn 2 and giving it flying, first strike, trample, lifelink, haste, pretty sweet. Soul Flayer, getting rid of that out of the graveyard, flying, first strike, trample, lifelink, haste, awesome. Let's see. This one also does Vigilance, which is a little more relevant, but together, I think that could be pretty sweet, chat. Obviously, we have like Zatalpa, Primal Dawn for the Indestructible and things, and you can play like the Artifact lands and like Velvegoth Lair and things like that for the Hexproof, but being able to just hit one of these off of Soul Flayer or Priest, or even what's the other card? Urborg Scavenger, maybe 3 mana card that does the same thing. You have a lot of creatures that you can cast for cheap that you can power up real quick when you have 8 of these cards to hit off their triggers. So I don't know, chat. Could be pretty cool. I'm excited for that one. Giantcraft Helm. Interesting. 1 mana, which makes it very relevant and comparable to something like Hammer. Whenever a creature you control with mana 5 or greater enters, you may attach this equipment to it. Gets +4/+4, equipped for 5. So, same thing. Colossal Hammer, right? You're not actually trying to pay that equip cost. So, if you're playing Sigarda's Aid, or you're playing the 1-drop that perpetually gives it a different equip cost, then it's like a mini hammer, right? You're paying 1 mana to equip it, and suddenly you get +4/+4. That's pretty hot. With all the warp cards going around, right? Like, this is also kind of cool, where you could, like, turn 3, play a Quantum Riddler, draw a card, ephemerate it with a Giantcraft Helm out. It comes back in, draw another card, and then suddenly you have a 9/10, or I'm sorry, an 8/10 flyer on the board. That's pretty hot. Cheap, and it closes the game out in just a couple turns. Along with that, it's also just like kind of interesting in like generic green decks, right? Like if you're playing a Stompy list where you're just jamming like Galta, or we had a Simic Beans list where we were powering out like Tolarian Terrors. I feel like obviously it could slot in there and it's easy to equip, but with those style of decks, like if you're playing a Galta, does it really need 4 more power, chat? Probably not. You're probably just winning off the Galta. But again, it's just another arrow in the quiver for those kinds of decks. It's just another option they have. But I definitely see it more in these sort of decks in that equipment list as like a pseudo hammer, or sort of cheating on these effects with like warp of things, or like evoking a Null Drifter or something like that, and then bouncing it and getting equipped. And then you have like an Annihilator 1 8/8 with flying, I think, something like that. I don't know, I'm talking on my butt, chat, but pretty cool. And then lastly, chat, not too much to say about these, but I do like that we are getting some additional lands to mess with that are a little bit more unique. So Multiversal Passage is just a shock land that taps for 1, but it's any shock land you want. So you can choose white, blue, black, red, or green, and then that land is the chosen type. So the cool thing is it is that land type. So if you have something that cares about islands or mountains or swamps, it does count towards that, which is pretty sweet. But it's also can enter tapped in the late game if you don't need it, or early game if you don't want to pay the life. You're good to go. But it's really good color fixing, especially since we just got Starting Town. I think this is a good addition to the sort of rainbow suite of lands that we have. On the right is Urban Retreat. Enters tapped, taps for Bant colors. Return. It basically has in web, right? You return a tap creature you control to its owner's hand. Put that card from your hand onto the battlefield. Activate as a sorcery. So I like that one for the same reasons I like in webbed, and that 3-mana taxing creature we talked about earlier is one. It's ramp, right? You can put additional land onto the field, but also you get to bounce that creature back to your hand. So if you have like a Thraben Inspector, you played on 1, turn 2, play your land, swing, then you can play an additional land in mono white, play an additional land, and return your Thraben Inspector back and play it. Kind of thing. So super cool. Not sure again, it would be play as a 4 of, but having that extra utility to rebuy some ETB effects in your Bant colors, which already play them, like Soul Hoarder and that kind of thing, feels like it's going to find its niche uses, at least as a 1 of in some decks. And then over on the left there, exclusive Nightclub, taps for Grixis colors, enters tapped. If it's from your graveyard that you play it, you lose 2 life. And it has Mayhem, and Mayhem, again, is that card, is the ability that if you discarded it, you may play it from your graveyard that turn. So, that's like, you know, turn 2, Faithless Looting, discard a Nightclub and something else, you can just play the Nightclub from your graveyard. So you can still get rid of lands out of your hand and like keep the important stuff, but then still hit your land drop for the turn. So pretty freaking sweet. I like that they're sort of exploring some new design space with these lands especially. I also like that they're not a full cycle. They're kind of just unique to the colors they're in. But I'm excited to play with these as well. But I think Multiversal Passage will probably make the biggest impact, allowing to fix a lot of colors and things like that too. So, anywho, chat. I know there's a lot of cards. There's other cards I'm interested in or other cards I'll find interesting later on once the set's actually released. But I wanted to show you sort of the ones that I just had my initial thoughts on for the set, which I believe comes to Arena on the 26th. But overall, Spider-Man, aka Through the Omenpaths, is the first time we're getting a reskin set. I'm not crazy about it. I am excited. I'm always excited when we get new cards. I think there's quite a few, like the ones I showed today, that have some merit to exploring more, slotting into some old decks, trying to spark some new ones. But overall, I think the set's not going to be like a huge impact to the historic format, but I think it's definitely going to shine some new light on some of the older things and hopefully help out some decks that need it or create some new archetypes here or there. But the fact that it's so small probably means it's not going to do a whole lot, honestly. But either way, we're going to be brewing with it as soon as it comes out, in no particular order. But if you have any ideas or any other thoughts on the cards I showed, or any additional thoughts on any of the cards in Through the Omenpaths #1, feel free to leave a comment down below. You can send me a message in Discord, or you can come catch us on stream, like I said, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, 8 p.m. on Twitch, same handle, at MTG Jank Tank, and we'll have some fun trying to get some pictures of Spider-Man. Not really, they're just spider heroes. It's not the same, chat. But anywho, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!